Farmer with you and celebrating World Teacher Day. We were in conversation with Chandini Misra, the principal of Repton Al Barsha, about how she got into teaching, some of the challenges in the industry now, and why it's so important to celebrate and recognise the contribution of teachers throughout the year, although, spoiler alert, a free coffee doesn't hurt either. Also in studio, the new principal of the Royal Grammar School, Guildford, Dubai, Scott Bryan. He's back in the UAE at the helm. So how did he get into teaching? And ultimately, how can you prioritise and celebrate the achievements of teachers and build a culture within a new school?
This is Eye on Education on Afternoons with Helen Farmer.
With Royal Grammar School Guildford Dubai, sister school of RGS Guildford in the UK, educating the leaders of tomorrow since 1509.
We love introducing you to the experts, and this can take all manner of forms from, chefs whose restaurants have scored Michelin stars. We've had many a lawyer in the studio. We talk money a lot. But it is Eye on Education today, and we're joined by Sara Haboubi, who's a specialist in supporting individuals with dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia through her coaching programme, Jumpstarting Learning. She's got an extensive background in helping students and adults, I should say, not just the kids, alike in overcoming challenges with learning differences and ultimately empowering them to use their strengths. She's worked in 80 schools in Ireland and currently offers KDHD approved courses here in Dubai. So we are going to be picking her brains for the next hour with advice for parents, teachers and individuals who are facing some challenges. And you can reach out on 4001 on the ARN Play app and on the WhatsApp too. Now, if you were listening earlier this week, you might have heard me chatting to my colleague Ellis Horn from the ARN News Centre. She's a journalist, works with words every day and does it very well. But she's also dyslexic, something she found out quite late during her education.
I probably didn't fall into the category of the typical child that was struggling at school. I had a big personality. I was A-star for solo talks, into drama, all that kind of thing, but just fell through the net, which I just think a lot of kids that happens to.
And then there was this moment of reckoning, I suppose, which is the exam period. So when I say failing GCSEs, what we're talking about? What happened?
So this was prelims time, so that just before, the big finals. And I think up until that point, I had managed to sort of get through education by remembering photographic memory. So all the class tests, the small sort of mock exams, I seemed to sail through. And then the big, prelim, which is the full year test, I just couldn't hide it, I guess, and I actually failed more or less every subject in high school.
Alice says sometimes the impact on dyslexic person's confidence can be as hard to manage as the condition itself.
For me, the biggest thing is never be ashamed to ask for help. Even here at ARN, my colleagues, I'm always asking for someone to double check, triple check, and it's just not having the embarrassment of that, because I definitely know I'm clever enough, but I just think people can't take that step to say, oh, listen, I'm struggling. Does that make sense? Or is my grammar okay? Is my spelling okay? And I think that's what holds you back. It's not the dyslexia. It's just the reaching out and asking for that help.
Our colleague Ellis speaking to us earlier this week, as I said, in the studio today for your free clinic and answering any questions that you might have about yourself or your child. Sara Haboubi, teacher and specialist from Jumpstarting Learning. Thank you so much for being with us today, Sara. How are you?
Oh, I'm lovely. Thanks. I'm not. I'm lovely. You're lovely.
Well,
it's lovely to be here.
We're all lovely. I'm
really
pleased you're here, because after hearing Ellis's interview, we had so many people asking where to go for help. And I think it's one thing to go, okay, there are some red flags, I'm hearing this and I'm seeing this, but what's the next step? So that's why you're in the hot seat today. Tell us about the beginning of this journey for you. Why is this an area that you're really passionate about?
So I've come into this in a very unusual way. I'm not actually a teacher, I'm a coach. I'm a learning coach. My background is actually engineering, so I have that kind of brain. I like to solve problems, but I need to know what exactly the problem is first. So I then went into NLP coaching and training 22 years ago, and immediately when I was learning those techniques, I felt that these would be really useful in school, particularly with teenagers, which was where one of the issues I had sort of come about when I was 15 and I was in boarding school. And,
right.
I was able to clear that very quickly with the NLP techniques. And then when I moved to Ireland, I started actually working with a local secondary school, and it was more to do with exam stress, dealing with those sort of things, confidence, behaviour issues. And when I started working, I was with 17, 18-year-olds who were just at their final stage of school. And about halfway through the year, I said, you know what, I'm actually a bit late with these kids because they've missed so much information. They've got very low confidence. They don't really believe in themselves. It's going to take a lot of work at that stage to actually help them. And I could help them, but I knew that if I'd got them a bit earlier, it would have been easier. So throughout the following sort of 5-6 years, I got younger and younger students. And then the last year I was there, which was in 2010, I had 40 first and second year students. So that would be 12, 13-year-olds. And my remit was to help them with their literacy and their numeracy. And I just said, okay, that's very strange because they've already done 8 years. That's not my area. And they said, but you've just had such amazing results with other students. We'd really like you to give us a go. And a few months later, I actually went to a conference and I met a lady called Olive Hickmott. And she's dyslexic, and she had actually overcome her dyslexia through NLP techniques, which I was absolutely gobsmacked at. So I got speaking to her, and I brought her over to Ireland. I did a training with her. Read all her. She's actually written 5 books, believe it or not. Wow. And her story was the one that really struck me. So she said she was on an NLP training, and at one point, and anyone who's done a training will know this point of the course, where you start talking about strategies. And the strategies are not just external. They're about the interplay between the external and the internal world and the order in which you are processing information and how you're doing it. And on the course, they were talking about spelling strategies. And in the 80s, a guy called Robert Dilts had decided to go out and basically interview about 200 average spellers to see what strategy were they using, to see was there a common one. And he actually found there was indeed a common spelling strategy amongst good spellers, which is if you think of the word or you hear the word, you will look up in your mind's eye, you will see the word sort of clearly and still, and you'll have a feeling of familiarity. And so what you're effectively doing is copying down from what you see inside your head. And Olive went, oh, well, no one told me to do this. She realised she could see numbers inside her mind's eye, which meant that she went on then to do a maths degree and she ran software companies, etc. But she suddenly went, well, if someone had told me to do that explicitly when I was younger, she said, I would have been able to spell and to read.
Oh, I just got goosebumps because it's that kind of what if, isn't it? It's the missed opportunities, and like Ella's saying, going through the cracks.
Yes,
and that's really, really heartbreaking, to be honest. We know more now than we did, certainly when I was at school, and I'm sure there were lots of kids that were deemed naughty and disruptive who now would have a diagnosis and get the help they needed. And we know more about what we're talking about today, but I still think there's a bit of stigma around it. I still think there needs to be more done about it.
There definitely is. And what I love about the Jumpstarting process is it's not about labels. It's all about processes. And what is actually happening with most people with dyslexia and dyscalculia and dysgraphia is that they are not, they haven't really developed their mental imagery specifically around language and words or even numbers. So they might have a completely wild imagination, and often that's what you'll find is they're really creative. They see the world very differently. They've got a totally different perspective. They're sort of global learners. They kind of learn things in sort of they're not linear. It kind of all comes together. Whereas actually in school, they've been taught in a very linear fashion, sort of step by step, and that just for some of them, they get lost. So what we do in Jumpstarting is we actually find out what strategy they're currently using, what their mental imagery is like, can they control images inside their heads, and if not, we then teach them how to do that.
Oh, there's lots to talk about, and there's lots of questions and messages coming in for you. So Sara Haboubi in the studio, and we're going to be unpacking the differences, I guess we've just been talking about there, and some of the signs of each. We're going to be talking about red flags and, yes, some strategies next.
This is Eye on Education on Afternoons with Helen Farmer.
With Royal Grammar School Guildford, Dubai, sister school of RGS Guildford in the UK, educating the leaders of tomorrow since 1509.
Sara Haboubi is with us today. She's a specialist in supporting individuals with a whole range of issues, but we're talking today about dyslexia, dyscalculia and dysgraphia, offering some practical advice for parents and many of you getting in touch, teachers as well. She is from Jumpstarting Learning. She offers KDHD approved courses and is going to be speaking at the upcoming BSME TeacherCon. But today we've stolen her away to answer our questions. Now, those terms that I just said, probably quite clumsily, Sara, would you mind breaking down in simple terms what we can help with, really, and a little bit more about them?
Okay, so dyslexia is basically about words, dyscalculia is about numbers, and dysgraphia is about handwriting. And the reality is everyone is actually doing one of those differently. So there's no sort of one umbrella that you can go, right, if they have these symptoms, this is definitely dyslexia or it's definitely dyscalculia. And actually quite often as they go hand in hand as well. So that's why I actually work across all three. But I always start with dyslexia. I always start with word skills. It's quite interesting because with sort of numbers and maths, it's almost sort of socially acceptable to be bad at maths, whereas to be sort of, terrible at reading or spelling is far less socially acceptable. And as you said earlier, there is still a stigma attached. Excuse me. And a lot of people who do have dyslexia feel very self-conscious and they feel as if somehow they're stupid because they're looking at their peers who seem to be able to do something that looks quite simple and they really struggle. So it could be things like letter reversals, whole word reversals. It can be just words don't make any sense at all. So when they're writing something down, it's absolute gobbledygook. And even when they look at it, they don't know what they were trying to write. So it's as if something is going on inside their brain that they are not controlling and they're thinking, but maybe their brain's actually thinking too fast. So almost sort of...
like tripping up on themselves.
And they could have multiple screens inside their heads. I had a student who was 23 when I worked with him, and he said he had almost like computer tabs open, and he would have had about 100 tabs open in his brain. So he'd start writing with one tab open as he was thinking, and then another tab would kind of
push forward.
And then he'd carry on the sentence with that information, and of course it didn't make any sense.
What a beautiful way of explaining it, though. And that must be really empowering for you to be able to give people the language as well about their processes.
Yeah, metacognition is absolutely key.
Sara, pop some headphones on because we've got a caller on the line. Barira, thank you for joining us on the line. Tell us a little bit about your daughter. What has she been coming up against and what's she struggling with?
Hello, Helen. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How can we help?
My daughter is 11. She's turning 11 next month, and she is dyslexic and dysgraphic both. And I had her diagnosed when she was in year 2, because I saw the symptoms. I am an undiagnosed dyslexic person, so I know the struggles. Mm-hmm. I recognized it, got her the help as early as possible, hoping with the better help, she'd have it all sorted by now. But unfortunately, that's not happened. She's had occupational therapy. She has great learning support from school. And she also goes to a private tutoring center to help her additionally with the academics. During school, she's fine. It's the GLs, the board exams, where she has to do things independently and on a timer. Mm-hmm. That's where everything goes. And she manages just by the average numbers, or just at the border of below average, or, just above that mark. And now that she's in year 6, I'm worried. Where is she going to go? Because she's also very anxious. She's an anxious child.
That's what I wanted to ask you. How is this affecting her confidence, her self-esteem, anxiety? If she's coming up against things that she's recognising that she's quote unquote not doing well on.
It,
that's
and
hard.
It embarrasses her. It's the fear. Sarah was just talking about the fear. Mm-hmm. That you don't ask for help because you fear the embarrassment. Everybody knows that I don't know it. And she says it. She does say it. And she has grown as a student. We've seen that and we appreciate it. She gets a lot of appreciation from school, from everybody around her. Yet she knows there is this thing that's holding her back. Mm-hmm. And she asks questions like, why am I dyslexic? Why do I have dyslexia? What happened? And I tell her, something that you've probably gotten from me. And it's all right. It's nothing that you should be embarrassed of or fear. It's just something you need to adjust with, or just learn how to manage it. It's just fine.
Barira, you sound like an amazing mum. And I guess what we can do, Sara can do now, is kind of, two parts really. Would be good to get an understanding of how accommodating the exam boards are for dyslexic and dysgraphic children. And also, I guess, from your point of view as a parent, preparing your daughter emotionally for what could be coming over the next few years. Sara, what would you advise?
Okay, so the first question is, what's she good at?
She is great at sports, and she's great with math. Okay. It's the English and the science and all the words. She has to sit down write things, read things, comprehend, and put them into words.
Okay, well, it's great to hear.
I'll give you an example. I'm sorry, I just want to make you understand. Just this morning, she didn't want to go to school because she had to write a conclusion of her science task, and she hadn't because she didn't know how.
Okay.
And it took a long time to get her there.
So very classic symptoms. Very bright, normally very good at things like sports, socializing, maybe art would be, one of them. Very creative. If you ask them verbally, they'll be able to tell you the answer. So it's not that they don't know the information, it's that they can't organize it inside their heads to be able to write it down. And they probably don't know the spelling of the words. So one of the things that sort of is happening now with technology is people think, oh, you've got spell check. So, or you've got all these sort of, dictation software. So you just dictate into the computer and it will just basically type it up for you. Yeah. However, really what we all want to do, and I'm a mum as well, is we want our children to be successful, independent and confident learners. We want them to be able to do this on their own without having to have a crutch, because you might not always have a computer. You might have a form that you need to fill in, and you want to be able to do that on your own. You don't want to have help, especially once school's finished and they go into university level. It does get more challenging. So what it sounds like for her, if she's good at maths, then she can see numbers inside her mind's eye. And therefore, she will be able to see words inside her mind's eye if she was taught explicitly how to do that. And one of the things with things like writing something up in terms of science or maths problems, word problems in maths, is that it's not the mathematics and it's not the science, it's the language, it's the word side of it. And the other thing that you mentioned was her anxiety. And what often happens is that the symptoms will actually get worse the more anxious the person is. So what you want to do is you want to also show her how to basically get calm. And that's because, I will talk about the scientific explanation why it's really important to be in what we call the optimal learning state, which is a relaxed body and an open mind. And that's because you've got two parts of the brain that work inversely, the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala is your safety system. It's looking to the outside world to know, am I safe? Am I okay? And your hippocampus is basically what's nicknamed the learning organ. And that will transfer information from the front of your brain, your working memory, etc., into the long-term memory and vice versa. If you are stressed, then your amygdala is activated and it goes into high alert, and your hippocampus, the dendrites, the little branches inside the hippocampus actually pull back, which means nothing goes in and nothing can come out. And this piece of information, this one piece of information, can make such a huge difference to students, parents, teachers, to understand how important it is that children know themselves how to get into an optimal learning state. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the process that I teach. So I would be looking at, what is actually happening inside her mind regarding words. Are they still? Are they jumbling around inside of her head? Can she just not see them at all? Is she constantly trying to sound them out? Because we know that there is a phonological deficit with a lot of people with dyslexia, so they keep focusing on trying to segment and blend rather than actually seeing the whole word, putting it into their long-term memory and then being able to retrieve it easily.
Barira, with your permission, I'm going to send you the details of Sara, if that would be helpful, and then you guys can have a chat, because I think you explained it so beautifully there, Sara. It really did, and I hope even that was helpful in terms of some of the strategies that can be put in place. Barira, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you, Sara.
Wishing you and your daughter all the very best, and I think it's just really encouraging, actually, for you to hear that and not be fazed by anything that we're talking about today, and saying, do you know what, there are things that we can do.
This is Eye on Education on Afternoons with Helen Farmer.
With Royal Grammar School Guildford, Dubai, sister school of RGS Guildford in the UK, educating the leaders of tomorrow since 1509.
In studio today, we've got Sara Haboubi. She's a coach. She's a specialist at Jumpstarting Learning, supporting individuals, and I say individuals very deliberately, because it's not just children, but adults as well, who've got dyslexia, dyscalculia and dysgraphia. We've been talking about issues with numbers, with words, with handwriting, and actually a number of messages for you, Sara, on the topic of handwriting. We've also had some lovely messages with people having really positive experiences. One here saying, my grandson has dysgraphia. He was diagnosed by a doctor from America, who were a lot more forgiving than they were in the UK, and then went to university. They didn't really recognise the problem, and he's only given 25% extra time. But after they said otherwise, he'd be having an unfair advantage. Well, he had a difference. So in the end, my son managed to convince him that if he didn't have an unfair advantage, that he gets 100% extra time in his exams. He's not judged in his handwriting or his flow. He's given a quiet place to work. and he's been really, really flying. Just like the other lady said, verbally very bright, just couldn't write anything down. So university's been really accommodating, and he's got some great results. You just said to me off air some really interesting information about the number of kind of quote unquote successful people who have got dyslexia. Let's bust some myths, because that limiting belief can be really powerful and destructive for a lot of people.
Absolutely. So we see a figure around 60% of entrepreneurs tend to be dyslexic, and around 40% of millionaires are dyslexic.
Wow.
So that's really interesting. And the more dyslexic people I meet, the more I want to be dyslexic.
It's a superpower.
It is absolutely a superpower.
Why do you think that is? You were talking before about learning in a global way, looking at things differently.
So they are big picture thinkers. And what an entrepreneur is someone who comes along and solves a problem in a unique way. So they see the world very, very differently. The lady who taught me is dyslexic herself. She's now in her 80s. And I would be having a conversation with her, and she would just be able to, just in a second, come up with a solution that was so obvious once she said it. And she was always like that. So she actually taught me as well how to see the world through the eyes of someone who's dyslexic. Not in terms of jumbling everything up, but actually seeing things from a much bigger picture and being able to see solutions and sort of get outside the box. I mean, we talk about outside the box thinking. Spelling, handwriting, reading, math, they're all in the box things. So as long as you can do those things really, really well, you'll get on in school. The problem is you could be an amazingly creative person, but if you are struggling with your handwriting, your spelling, your reading, and obviously basic maths, then that bleeds into all the other subjects. How do you get on then with geography or history or science? So if we can actually teach people how to control their mental imagery, it all comes down to mental imagery. What are you doing inside your mind's eye? It's one of the key tools for learning anything. And we're not teaching people how to do that explicitly. So that's what this system does.
So you talk about mental imagery being the key to unlock learning success. What are the emotional or psychological benefits as well that you've seen with people? Because
this is the bit I love. This is the bit that gets me. So as soon as students recognise that the way that they've been trying to learn doesn't work, and then I help them to go through a different door, basically in their brain, and it just clicks. So in 90 minutes, I can teach someone to spell. And I've been doing this for a long time now, so I know no matter what age they are, I'll show them the right strategy. I'll help them to learn the right strategy. And what happens is often immediately, or certainly in a very short space of time, I will get the feedback of, I really thought I was stupid. I thought I was the dumbest kid in the class. And now I know I am absolutely not stupid, and I'm just as clever as anyone else, if not sometimes cleverer.
Oh, I love this. I've got so many people I want to introduce you to. If you're thinking the same thing, the podcast will be available later. So if you're listening to this podcast, someone out there has thought of you and loves you and wants you to unlock your potential there. Sara Haboubi with us today. If you want her questions, send me the word learn and I'll happily share their website. Up next, we are going to go to the text line. We've got a number of questions about handwriting. So if there's something that's stressing you out, it's your last chance to get a question in.
This is Afternoons with Helen Farmer on Dubai Eye 103.8.
With Mubadala Health Dubai, a specialty clinic and day surgery centre for every stage of your family's life. Trusted for care. Call 800 77.
It is Eye on Education, and we're in conversation now talking about learning challenges, learning differences, and we've had a lot of messages. I'm going to kind of go to two that I feel like will help as many people as possible, Sara, if that's okay. One here saying, my year 5 son has problems with handwriting and has since FS. It's getting him down. He's struggling to write enough in lessons and complains it's uncomfortable and hard and it's making him dislike school. He's bright, he's top of the class in other subjects. He'll draw pictures willingly, but not that often. He does like things like Lego perfectly. I've posted on Facebook about his handwriting last week, which led me to come across dysgraphia. And now you guys today, what should I do as a parent?
Okay, so one of the things is actually very simple. It's the angle of the paper.
The paper?
Yep. So if you're right-handed, so essentially you're looking at a 45-degree angle to the body or to the edge of the table. Mm-hmm. So the edge of the paper, sort of the far edge of the paper, should be parallel. The arm should be parallel with that. If he's left-handed, then it's literally a mirror. So often what happens with left-handers is they're trying to write on the page at the angle that the right-handers are using. And that will be why they sort of curl their hand over and smudge their letters, etc. But if you actually do it the other way, they'll actually write it exactly the same as a right-hander, but just obviously.
That's interesting.
Mirror.
So super practical there.
Yep. The other one is that, again, I just wonder what his spelling's like. Because no, she didn't say about the spelling. If the spelling is okay, but it's not fantastic, then that again comes down to if he's not seeing the whole word in his mind's eye, then it's going to be quite challenging for him to actually write it down. So
and challenging to write it down in a flow.
In a flow. And if he's sort of, so again, sort of the student actually with the multiple screens, this was, he was such an eye. I learn from my clients. That's what I always love. So I always like to share their stories because it was enlightening for me. And so one of the problems he had was that he couldn't write in an exam. He found it really, really difficult under pressure, etc. And often he would get to a word he wanted to use. He wouldn't know how to spell it. So then he didn't want to write it and have an incorrect spelling. So then he'd spend about 1 minute trying to figure out what other word could he use and would often end up having to change the entire paragraph or the sentence because that word wouldn't have the same meaning.
Exhausting. Poor thing.
So often people go, don't worry about spelling, don't worry about grammar. The reality is actually they do matter, particularly when it comes to having to actually write answers. And one of the things with older students is obviously if you're in university, etc., you might be typing all your essays. But then when you sit in your exam, you're actually having to handwrite. So a lot of students are losing the ability. Maybe they don't have this. Yeah, stamina, it's sort of muscle tone, etc. Another practical piece of advice would be to get a writing slope. So I'm old enough, I'm very old, to remember the sloping desks at school. Do you remember those? You'd lift them up and you'd often find things in there.
Stuff inside, block chewing gum.
Yeah, shouldn't be in there. So that actually really takes a lot of strain off the wrist as well. So an OT, can recommend where to get one or just look online. And in actual fact, a slope is really good for reading as well because you're lifting the page up. And again, that sort of 45-degree angle is the best. So one of the things as well is just exploring language and just kind of making it a bit more fun. Organising thoughts is quite difficult, quite challenging for people who do have these labels.
Well, that's why you said the word labels there. And I'm curious, how important is it to have a diagnosis as such? If people are going, oh, well, we haven't had this assessed, but I actually could do with help in a lot of the things you're talking about today.
So I don't assess. So just in case people are looking for an assessment from me, that's not my area. And I work with people who have been assessed and who are just suspected or just any kind of challenge actually in terms of learning. Often what happens, and I have seen this multiple times, is once the diagnosis has been given, it's almost like a sigh of relief is kind of, oh, thank God, now we know what's wrong. But there's sort of an expectation that inherent in the diagnosis is the solution. The reality is it's just the beginning. And I'm not, it's a double-edged sword. If you do have the diagnosis, you can get extra help. You'll get the learning support. You might get extra time. You might be able to use a laptop, etc. But also it can lead to students blaming everything on their dyslexia or their ADHD or, dyscalculia that, oh no, I can't do it because I'm dyslexic. So I call it
a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I call it labelism. They've kind of bought into that label hook, line and sinker. And again, it can maybe, undermine their confidence.
No, hold them back. On the flip side, do you have parents who might be in denial about issues that their child might be facing?
Yes, I think like anything, if you're not educating, you don't really understand what it is, you can be afraid of it. You can worry that this label will then mean that they are perceived as being stupid, etc. When the reality is, if you look at the statistics, most people with dyslexia actually have higher than average intelligence. And in fact, there's actually something called 2E, which is double exceptional, where they are exceptionally good at something and exceptionally bad at words or numbers. So you have these twice exceptional students. And when they're so exceptional, say like music or art or maths or science or computing even, there is a sense of like, well, how can they not be able to just simply spell or write?
Why can't that be applied to this area?
And they go, just get on, just do it, just work harder. And it's like, no. This is not about working harder. This is actually finding the right way into the brain that actually works best for that student.
That's all we've got time for. We did have a message about numbers, but to everyone who wants to send me the word learn, Sara, with your permission, I'll send the website.
Absolutely.
There's information there for teachers. I've had a few messages from teachers and tutors, for parents as well. So coaching, and you've said you can teach someone to spell in 90 minutes.
90 minutes.
Oh, I've got a few people I might put to the test on that. Sara Haboubi, thank you so much. Speaking to us from Jumpstarting Learning. As I said, if you'd like those details, you don't need to put your name on a message. Just send me the word learn and I will send you that website. It is Eye on Education with me, Helen Farmer, and we're celebrating teachers.
This is Eye on Education on Afternoons with Helen Farmer.